Hey everybody, how are y'all doing today? Happy Valentine's! That comes from this chapter about Samuel being late. I know there might be a lot of people who've been stood up for a date today. I don't know. That's what popped in my mind. It was like, it's like, uh, maybe this will resonate with some people, how things happen sometimes, and maybe, um, also there's other people that may be thinking about, um, you know, timing and having to wait for thinking that life isn't um, uh, going according to plan and they're in a period of waiting, and then that's what this chapter is kind of about. It's talking about this waiting room, this type of waiting room that we enter with God sometimes, and how God makes us wait sometimes, uh, and how that is important to that we wait on God. So, there's a few other points to the story too besides that, but that was the main thing that stuck out to me that related to today. But that's where the title of the message came from. And the title of the message is "Stood Up When God is Late for a Date and the Importance of Patience." 1 Samuel 13. So in this chapter, we see this moment. This moment marks kind of the beginning of Saul's downfall, because he did something that Samuel warned him in the last chapter. He warned them, if they didn't walk the line, that they was going, bad things would happen, and so they this was part, Saul. Um, this is where it all started. This showed where the beginning when we see his character flaws was insecurity. It just, but then this was his first mess up that started on that after God gave him the new chance and installed Saul as king and said, okay, now y'all do right, and then you know he expected Saul and the people to do the right things, and you know it didn't last long till they done started messing up. So um, how this starts out is that they find themselves in this military crisis because of Jonathan, Saul's son. Out of his zeal for God, he starts up this um, beef with the Philistines, and and this crisis is what, because it ultimately reveals Saul's character, and serves as a lesson between the difference between religious performance and genuine faith. So, as we said, as I said, it starts out where they're in this desperate spot at the beginning of this chapter because Jonathan has done sparked this war with the Philistines, and in response to it, the Philistines have mobilized this army that is so vast it says that they outnumber the sand of the seashore. There's a lot of them, and so they're fixing to have to go to battle with this huge enemy, this huge army that outnumbers them by, you know, I mean, it's insurmountable. And so Saul is instructed by Samuel to wait 7 days at Gilgal for him to come, and they was going to offer the sacrifices for the Lord before they went into the battle. And But Saul gets anxious as the deadline approaches. Um, he starts to look around and starts to get worried about things. It's that insecurity again in him. And he started looking around, and he said, and the people started getting anxious, and they started scattering, and lots of them started falling away from him. They started kind of, um, uh, there's a murmuring going on, and they was all like, well, we've been sitting here. They were all worried. They were scared. Fear was setting in. And the Philistines were, they say them Philistines, they was ready to pounce. I mean, the Philistines outnumbered them, and then, so that all this anxiety was taking hold. And here Samuel is. He told him to wait 7 days, and he winds up late. He thought he hadn't showed up by the 7th day. He didn't show up. So they think that they done been abandoned by God. They was like, oh, the prophet ain't showed up. So they're in panic mode. And as a result of this, Saul's feeling this pressure this whole 7 days, and then as he gets closer and closer to this line, and then Samuel don't show up, and he's like, oh no, I gotta do something. So he took matters in his own hands and goes and disobeys the Lord. And what he does is he goes himself, his thing. He's not a prophet, he's not a priest. And the only people who were supposed to offer sacrifices was priests. But Saul takes it upon himself that he's going to go offer sacrifices. And so he goes out there and he does it. He does the burnt offerings and sacrifices himself. And just as he does it, Samuel shows up. And of course, Saul has an excuse. Saul was compelled to do it. Yeah, he was compelled to do it by fear. And he didn't want to trust God and wait on God. So he disobeyed him. It was disobedience. And so, but it was also this idea that he was viewing the sacrifices, just like how I said before, when the Israelites took that ark before them in battle, because they thought that the ark was going to save them when they went for the Philistines, that wound up getting the ark captured. I forget which chapter that was we just studied, but because they treated it like a good luck charm. That was my message I did about the Lucky Charms and tricks or tricks for kids. They tried to treat God like the good luck charm instead of having a reverence and obedience and being surrendered and submitted to God. And he tried to treat him like it was this ritual over presence. Is basically what it was. And he prioritized the utility of God over the authority of God. The primary thing that motivated him to do this was fear, because he seen his troops was dwindling. And it was already outnumbered, and he seen that the troops was leaving, and he was like, and everybody was leaving. He was losing support. He thought, I'm losing support. They were not going to follow me, and I'm losing support, so I need to do something. Because he feared losing his reputation in his army more than he feared disobeying God's commands. That's that same insecurity, that character flaw that defines Saul. And so, he waited almost the whole time. But almost obeying God is technically still disobeying. There's no almost. That old saying, almost only counts with horseshoes and hand grenades. Well, it sure don't count with God. So, Because in the kingdom of God, time and method matter as much as the action itself. Then in the later part of this chapter, we see this contrast because we see Jonathan. Jonathan, of course, is Saul's son, and he's in this. And he contrasts this character of Jonathan with Saul. Um, you know, uh, Saul is the cautionary tale, but Jonathan provides a blueprint for spiritual growth by demonstrating what active, courageous faith looks like in contrast to his father's passive, fear-based religion. Jonathan understood that Israel was called to be free and that growth often requires a holy restlessness. He wasn't picking a fight for glory. He didn't pick that fight with the Philistines for glory, but he was acting on the covenant promises of God. And even though Jonathan lived under the authority of a father that was governed by fear and ego, when Saul blew the trumpet to take credit for Jonathan's victory, we see this in verse 3 or 4. What he did to Jonathan, he's trying to take credit for the small victory first that Jonathan had to have. So, I mean, Jonathan remained focused on the mission, not recognition, and maturing in faith often means serving where you do not get credit you deserve. This also highlights that we're supposed to, about trusting, this idea of trusting in God's timing. Trusting God's perfect timing is the most difficult discipline in Christian life. Because it requires us to crucify our sense of self-control. It requires us to, in full submission, surrender to God's will. To recognize this, it's out of our hands ultimately. And there's nothing that we can do, even, no matter what effort we put behind it. Those 7 days that Saul had to wait were this type of divine crucible. That's what God uses waiting for. He has you wait to refine you. That this 7 days was used for that, for Saul to reveal what was truly in his heart, and that's what God does with our waiting. He wants to see he tests our devotion, our willpower to follow Him, to stick with Him, to trust Him. Our resolve. So to Saul, Samuel was late, but to God, Samuel was exactly on time. As Samuel showed up, he said, "What have you done? What have you done?" It was part of it. It was like, it was a test that he failed. And we often confuse God's silence with God's absence. But He's never absent. There's a purpose behind everything. And if you have to wait, there's a reason in waiting. If He's not giving you the answer now, there's a reason He's not giving you the answer now. He's not answering that prayer. It may be because you're not ready for it. He knows what you'll do with it if He gives it to you too early. It also this tells us that, God often uses the test of the final hour. He tests us with right down to the wire. And I remember when I was waiting on, an answer on what was going to do about the city and moving this building. And Came down to the wire that week. I was waiting and I was holding on, and God the whole time. So it's it's a test. It's a test. It was a test of trust. He was weighing my heart. He was wanting to know how far was I willing to walk with him. But God frequently waits until the 11th hour to intervene to ensure there is no doubt that the rescue was His and not our own ingenuity. He wants you to run out. So when He provides, you know where the provision comes from. It also highlights that mirage of urgency. Saul let the visible world dictate his internal peace. He looked around and he was looking at everything that was going on, and he was allowing that to affect him instead of relying on God and God's promises that would keep him still and calm in the storm, at peace. When you rely on God, that's what happens. No matter what happens around you, the circumstances around you, you have an anchor. Trusting God's timing means believing that God is never in a hurry, yet He is never late. He'll show up. Right on time. His time. In the Hebrew mindset, waiting is an active expectation or a twisting or binding together. Saul waited physically, but his heart was pacing. He was watching the clock and not the commander. The lesson in this is that the wait is the tool God uses to strip away our self-reliance. If Saul had waited just 5 more minutes, he would have seen Samuel walking up the path. This made me think of the idea of I talked about Judas. So, Judas betrayed Jesus, but Jesus was willing to forgive anyone, and he would have forgiven Judas if Judas hadn't done what he did. If he would have waited 3 more days, he would have found out what forgiveness was. He forgave Peter for his denial. That's the importance of waiting. And take matters in your own hands. You cut off God's blessing. That's the consequence of forcing timing. When we get tired of waiting, we usually give birth to an Ishmael. That's what Abraham did. He wound up in a mess. Sarah actually did. That brought Hagar in there, and they wound up with an Ishmael. When God had Isaac in plan all along. That's a human solution to a divine problem. And it pales in comparison. It comes with burdens. Saul thought that he was saving his kingdom. Instead, his impatience cost him the kingdom. A blessing received through disobedience often becomes a burden. Then this chapter it shifts to this. At the end of this chapter, there's this interesting thing about this blacksmith monopoly that happened. Um, this is a shift from the spiritual crisis that uh, um, happened, but this was this physical desperation. It shows how desperate Israel was in their situation that they were in with the Philistines. Um, uh, with what the Philistines had done. What the Philistines did was they had pretty much created this. This shows how vulnerable they were, because Philistines had created this monopoly like thing where it was like a technological embargo. They had barred them from any weapons. They couldn't have any weapons, no swords, no shields, no nothing. And because they took all the they banned all the blacksmiths and from the land of Israel, so that they couldn't even manufacture swords and spears. They could make their own weapons. And for them to have so you need blacksmiths even just for tools, for implements, like you know, to farm. And so they made it to where they had to go to the land of Philistines to the blacksmiths there to get their farm implements, their plowshares and their axes, all this stuff sharpened. To even get them sharpened, they had to go into the Philistine territory, and they had to pay a high cost to have this done. And this was called a PM. This price that they had to pay, but so on the day that they had their battle with the Philistines, the only people in Israel that had a sword or a spear was Saul and Jonathan. The king and his son were the only ones that had a sword and a spear. The rest of the people, all they had was farm tools. So they were essentially going to war with all these farm implements, axes and hoes and whatever else they had, against this technological advanced Philistine army that had swords and spears and everything, that outnumbered them by the sand of the seashore. That's why they were so scared. There was no way they were rescuing themselves. The only rescue they had was the Lord, but yet they did not rely and trust Him. They still disobeyed. This shows what fear can do. You'll be in a desperate situation, and you get yourself in an even tighter spot. The enemy will disarm you. And then lead you on into the path of your own destruction, even further downhill. So, this chapter relates to the gospel and biblical narrative through first thing it does, it introduces this idea of the man after God's own heart, which is David. It tells, because that's what Samuel tells Saul after he sees what he's done, and he says, because you've done this, God has already decided that you will no longer be king. God has now started to look for somebody else. He's right now, at this moment, looking for somebody else that is a man after his own heart, because you have shown him that you are not. And so, because of Saul's refusal to submit to God as the ultimate king, um, so this is the immediate setting the stage of the start of the Davidic covenant, because this is where God starts his search for David. And this eventually, of course, points to Jesus, because David is the type. And of course, Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of the throne of David, and the Davidic covenant. So, this parallels the gospel in um, Jonathan being this Christ-like figure, as the king's son who fights the battle we couldn't win. And he's the prince who yields, which ultimately that's who Jesus was. But he was the prince who yielded to the ultimate king, which God, and then he became king. He received the throne, and he has all authority now. So then, and also, like Jonathan was the rightful heir to the earthly throne, Jesus is the rightful heir to the heavenly throne. And then Jonathan risked his life to initiate salvation, but that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to save his people through when he started this up with the Philistines. And Jesus gave his life to accomplish it. And Jonathan willingly stepped aside for David, and Jesus emptied himself to do Father's will. As we'll see later on, that's what Jonathan Jonathan and David were very close, and David loved Jonathan because David saw Jonathan's heart, and David himself was a man after God's own heart. So, where Saul failed under pressure, Jesus succeeded, and Jesus, the true king, waited perfectly on the Father's timing. Galatians 4:4 says, "But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son." This shows the importance. If Jesus could wait, we have to wait. We have to follow his example. Of waiting on God's perfect time. And it also parallels it in the weaponless state, highlights Saul's failure. He was chosen to lead, yet the nation became weak under his watch. And it prepares for God's glory. You don't defeat a sand-on-the-seashore army with pitchforks unless God is involved. Like I said, there was no way they were doing it on their own. It had to be God that was going to do it. And also parallels victory without weapons. Just as Israel was stripped of worldly weapons, Jesus defeated sin and death without a sword. The gospel teaches us that God's power is made perfect in weakness. He doesn't need us to have the best iron. He needs a heart that trusts him. And as far as the lessons for our spiritual growth, it's that we should have trust over totems. Don't treat spiritual disciplines like good luck charms. They are ways to align our hearts with his will. It teaches us waiting is a test. Most character reveals happen in the waiting rooms of life. How you act when God seems late reveals who you truly believe is in control. It also teaches us the danger of I felt compelled, as he said, he was compelled. He felt like he had no choice. That's what Saul said. He said, "I was forced." The King James Version says, "I was forced." I didn't have a choice. I had to. It teaches emotional urgency is a poor substitute for divine instruction. You let your emotions get the best of you over what God told you to do. That's not good. It also teaches us about this pen price that we should check our dependencies. The Israelites had to pay the enemy to maintain their tools. And we do this when we rely on the world's method to fix our problems. It teaches us the two swords principle. Saul and Jonathan were the only ones with swords, but only Jonathan had the faith to use what he had. And uh, uh, trusting in, has he ever actually failed to arrive? I know when I look back on things that's transpired in my life, I know that he's never um, left me to my. He's always showed up. That reminds me of one of the verses. I've never failed to see um, his people begging bread. Um, you ain't starved to death, have you? We also have to recognize service without the spotlight. Can you identify a situation where you are being called to serve like Jonathan, focused entirely on God's mission, even if someone else is getting the recognition? We're not supposed to worry about recognition because we're ultimately doing it for God and He recognizes. Believe me, He recognizes. He sees it all. And we have to recognize when we're unarmed for battle. Is there an area where you feel ill-equipped? How does knowing Jonathan won with only one sword and a God-sized faith change your perspective? And the spiritual insights for this chapter are: partial obedience is rebellion. God isn't looking for a mostly surrendered heart. He wants a whole one. An enemy will disarm you if you wait for perfect conditions or enough resources to serve God, and you will never step out of the cave. And finally, God often waits until we are strategically bankrupt to prove His sovereignty. But ultimately, even if we only have one sword, and that sword is Him, we're a winner. It don't matter if the enemy has an army bigger than the sands of the seashore. God's bigger than that. He won't stand you up. He might be a little late, but He'll be there. I love y'all. I'll see y'all next time.